This story happened when I was around 8 years old, and even confirmed it with my mother recently. A long time ago, my grandfather built a wooden cabin into the woods so my family could spend some time with nature. No electricity, no running water, not even toilets. Anyways, since the only thing to do was play outside, I explored the area a lot. The only rule was that if I didn't see the cabin through the trees anymore, I have to come back. When this happened, I was pretty experienced in navigating myself through the forest, so I dared to break the rule and, this time, go as far as I was comfortable with. I told myself that if I was doing this, I'd walk in a straight line to be sure not to get lost, even when I didn't see the cabin anymore. So I started my little exploration, and sure enough, after a couple of minutes, I couldn't see the cabin through the trees and continued forward. Some time passed and I noticed something in the distance, a wooden fence. At the time, I was already pretty sure no one lived in that direction, and even less so to our cabin. So I went to check it out. Suddenly, I heard a dog bark repeatedly. When I reached the fence, there were some little holes in them, as most wooden fences do, and I looked through it. I could see a dark and short-furred dog barking at me in a small house. It was nothing impressive. It really was just a regular small house with one floor, and maybe an earth basement, but I couldn't really tell. My first reaction was to tell myself that someone built a house on our land illegally and thought they wouldn't get caught. So I ran back home, like if the house was going to disappear, and found my mother in the front yard. I spit a torch her and told her everything, and obviously she said there was no way someone could have built a house here without us knowing, and thought I was joking or something. But I insisted so much that she decided to ask my brother to follow me so I could show him the house, and my previous fear got real. The house had completely vanished. I searched to finally see the wooden fence again. It couldn't be that far since I went in a straight line. But nothing. My brother just got bored and told me we were going back, and my mom told me we didn't find anything and the experience stopped there. But a couple of years later, I was talking to my father about the land and he told me we weren't the first to own it, as there were other people living here long times ago, in little houses that were on one or two old farms, but nothing was left of them except ruins. I visited these ruins and realized that at the time, that is what I saw. It was one of those small homes who were standing here long times ago, lost in the middle of the woods. So about 3 years ago when I was 17, I took my then girlfriend during the day to a little known wooded area with a beautiful waterfall near my house. The place used to be a train yard in the late 1800s and still has tracks that cross through the woods, albeit these tracks are completely covered by foliage at this point. It's really quite an amazing and beautiful area that I spent a lot of my time exploring. So I was completely at home in the woods. While I loved the area, it was the kind of place you were still careful at after dark. It's not in a great neighborhood, and a lot of creepy gangs and groups of unsavory characters have been known to hang out there. The graffiti suggests a lot of white supremacist groups and more than a few junkie groups. After we relaxed at the waterfall for a while, I decided to show my girlfriend some of the other cool parts of the woods, like a train track bridge over the waterfall's river. Coming away from there, there's a huge pit in the ground, around 20 feet across, that neither me nor my friends could ever figure out what it was for. In the center was always a metal slab that looked like it had scorch marks from quite a hot fire. And these marks were always new, although no one had ever seen people use it before. This is how the pit got the name, the Sacrifice Pit. It's actually really creepy how accurate that name is when you're looking at it. About 20 feet wide and 3 feet deep, with a plate large enough to hold a person tied down in the middle. As I'm explaining this to my girlfriend, and we're standing next to the pit, an older lady probably about in her 50s walks out of the woods. We had not seen her coming, or heard her for that matter, and she just sort of appeared. Then a little boy who couldn't have been more than 4 appeared behind her. It was almost surreal. The lady had tattered clothing and an incredibly creepy smile. Yellow teeth and all. The child just kept looking at us with a cold stare. He never moved once, just kept staring at us with those empty eyes. So, the lady gives us a creepy smile again and points to the pit and says, "Enjoying the view?" Me and my girlfriend just kind of look at each other and said, "Yeah, it's a beautiful day." She gives me that creepy smile again and says, "Yes, it is. Try not to get lost in the woods now," or something of that sort, and immediately turns back and goes back into the woods from the direction she came. The child who had been staring the whole freaking time with those empty eyes stares for a second or two more, then follows her back into the woods. Needless to say, we hightailed it a hell out of there. I've never been back to that place after, and I don't think I'll ever be able to get my girlfriend to go there again. So this happened a few months ago, and I'm still scared to this day. So my entire life, I had never really walked home from school all the way. I had always either been picked up or ridden the bus. So this year was my first year that I lived near the school to walk. I wasn't in the nearby neighborhood where 90% of the kids were. We were only living in our house temporarily, so I have to walk maybe a half mile to get home, across the highway. So at the beginning of the year, when I first started walking home, I didn't want to have to walk by the highway. The high school had a cut through in the forest that led to a strange and creepy lone road. I wanted to be cool and get home fast, even though it was way faster just to go on the highway, which isn't that bad, so I walked down across the forest to get to the cut through point. I see some older kids following me, but perhaps I'm just being paranoid. I ignored them and they turned out to be unimportant. In my head, for some reason, I had the Halloween theme stuck in my head, like when he is stalking them. Sorta eerie, right? But what was important was that my gut feeling, that maybe I should have taken the highway. I blamed all my gut feelings on those older kids and kept walking. Eventually, I cut through the forest and get to this road. It is gravel with some dead grass in the middle. I see where the highway is, but the road seemingly extends deep into the brambly forest. I decide this is a waste of time and I take the highway. But the next day, I didn't want to give up. I wanted to conquer this road, so I foolishly went back to the road, same sort of thing, an eerie, lone road with dead shrubs growing in it. I keep walking down the eerie road. I notice that there are zero cars coming up or down this road. It was abandoned. I kept walking into a big spider web on the middle of the road, which proved that there hadn't been cars here very often or for a long time. Otherwise, there'd be no webs. I continue walking down the road. It leads nowhere. It just keeps going deeper. I'm starting to get a bit scared at this point. Any car could drive down this road and take me, and nobody would ever hear me scream. I started jogging back to the road to the center. I saw a big gap into forest where the power lines were. Finally, I thought to myself, the ground next to the lines was still overgrown and full of ticks and tall grass, not to mention thorns and sticks. I kept walking down the area, and I was taking my sweet time. I finally made it into a small ravine in the middle of the area. I jumped over it and continued my way. I eventually get stuck around a big bush, because I didn't want to walk through the tall grass and get dirty. I must have been trying to work around the bush for 2 minutes, and then it slammed on me stone cold. I look up and see a man standing a good distance away from me. I don't move. I don't say a word. My heart is pounding. This dude has a creepy dark green rugged shirt, shaggy brown hair, and just overall creepy. He is staring at me and he grins. His face literally fucking grinned. He gestured for me to come over to him, and then he fucking steps to the side where I can no longer see him, and I hear leaves crunching. He's coming after me. The adrenaline was pumping through my heart. I bolt like lightning, fast up that fucking hill. I don't care about not getting dirty anymore. I just want to get the fuck out of there. I finally make it to the road and get to the highway. I turn back and see no sign of the creepy dude. I make it home and promise myself I'm never going to the woods again. The scary thing is, though, that he had just stepped to the side of the forest. I would have never seen him. I could have made it up that hill and he could have grabbed me, and I would have never have seen him again. Or the fact is that I live nearby. The creepiest part was that he grinned at me and made this really creepy gesture and then came towards me. Now, any normal adult would have said, "Hey, are you lost and can I help you?" Obviously, it could be a lie, but still. But nope, this guy watched me for who knows how long. I'll never go down that road again, and I hope I never get lost in the woods like that again. So this was back when I was about 15 or 16. I was riding my dirt bike around the woods and I wanted to explore a bit. I was tired of riding the same trails, so I drug my bike under an old gate and rode up this washed out road. I saw this little hill that looked like it would be an awesome thing to jump. So I got off my bike and climbed it to make sure that there wasn't anything I could hit if I jumped it. As soon as I got to the top, I got a weird feeling that I can't explain. It was a sunny hot day, but everything was shaded, and it was cool there. I felt really comfortable, like I belonged there, so I decided to explore a little more. It was a little half the size of a football field, and there were some rocks in the middle, and everything was covered with little green vines. So I decided to lay down on the rocks and relax. Laying there felt like time stopped. I couldn't have been there for more than 5 minutes when I got this strange feeling that I needed to leave. I jumped up and looked around, and it was darker, and the green vines had all turned a brownish color. I couldn't remember how to leave, so I ran to one side looking over and didn't see the road. I ran back to the other side and saw the road, but the hill looked like it was 10 feet taller and steeper. I grabbed a little tree and dropped off, holding it, letting it go. I hit the ground, grabbed my bike, and still couldn't remember how to leave. But I wasn't staying there, so I just took off. I grew up riding on this mountain, and there were only 4 places you can come out. I ended up coming out on the opposite side of the mountain and the road down to a friend's house. I told him about my experience, and he told me to talk to his uncle. His uncle was around 45 years old and went hunting ginseng out here when he was a kid. He knew every inch of the mountain, but he said 2 years ago, before he was hunting ginseng, he found a similar spot. He got lost and ended up spending 7 hours trying to find his way back out. His brother was worried because he was supposed to meet back at the truck and never showed up. It's like there was something there luring you within a false sense of peace when you are relaxed and it strikes. He said his grandma used to tell him stories of a witch that lived up on the mountain. And I don't know about that, but it scared me. To give this story some context, I need to state a few details about myself. My name is Jay, and I am 17 years old from the UK. I had a close friend. From the age of 13 to 16, he was my closest friend, and we did everything together. His name was John. We were both massively into wilderness survival, so we planned a trip to Scotland to spend a week alone in the forest to get a real survival experience. We were both really excited and invested in all the equipment needed to bring with us, as our parents wouldn't let us go without the correct safety measures. To give a brief idea of what we took, here is a list of the main items we took: a tent, a small combat knife each, a camping stove, rations, and miscellaneous items, such as rope, blankets, etc. After a long, dull, 10-hour car journey, we eventually made it to the edge of the forest. We were sent to venture in. My heart raced with excitement as I starved to get into the forest ahead. It was a lush green with flowers scattered around the floor. It was everything I imagined and more. We lugged our rucksacks onto our backs and started the long walk to where we planned to camp. It was a good 8-mile hike to get to the loch where we planned to camp near. I believe it was called Loch En Rye or something along those lines. So, we were ready for a 3 to 4 hour walk. This didn't faze me at all, as I was excited that I'd finally get to camp in the wild, as where I live there weren't really any places that you can camp away from other people. John was equally as happy as I was, with a wide smile across his face. After about an hour of walking, we stopped to take a break and had something to eat and drink. We were sat on a large rock in the middle of a clearing in the woods. Surprisingly, it was a nice day, and the sun was shining through the trees onto us. As we ate, we noticed a deer carcass about 20 feet away. Upon closer inspection, we found that it was pretty fresh, a day or two old at most, and the way it had died was definitely not natural. A large, deep gash ran across his neck and his hooves had been cut off, as well as his eyes being removed, leaving deep empty sockets with flies buzzing in and out. Me and John were curious of what had truly happened, but just guessed that it was some messed up kids or something, as we were only an hour deep into the forest. After that encounter, we moved on and completely forgot about it. After another 3 hours of walking, we arrived at the loch. It was a beautiful clear body of water with large fish swimming around. We found a flat patch of land and I proceeded to set up the tent to our camp as the night was drawing close. After about half an hour, we had camp set up and a fire made. After a quick meal, we went straight to bed as we were exhausted from the walk. For the first few days, nothing suspicious happened. We just built shelters and hunted to our heart's content. But on the fourth night, I left the camp to take a pee. After walking a good 50 meters away, I stopped to pee. When I looked up, I was horrified to see another deer, exactly the same as the other one that me and John had found on the way here. I shrieked and ran back to our camp. My heart was racing as I thought of all the reasons why it could have been there, and that close to our camp. What was happening? What if whoever did that finds us? Will we suffer a similar fate? I returned to find John putting the fire out as he was about to get into the tent. I caught my breath and John asked what was up. I grabbed him and jumped into the tent. "What are you doing?" John said in his usual loud voice. I hushed him and explained about the deer. He laughed and brushed it off as a joke, thinking that I was trying to scare him. I tried telling him that I wasn't joking, but he just laughed and said, "Prove it." There was no change in how that I was going back in that direction. As John reached for the zipper on the tent, a faint chanting started. It must have been in the distance, but it was enough to spook us both. We both grabbed for our little combat knives and clutched them as if it would bring us safety. The chanting grew louder and louder, and we decided that we needed to get the hell out of there. We grabbed our small emergency rucksacks and unzipped the tent floor. To our horror, there was around 4 cloaked figures just 15 feet away from us. We both froze in horror for a moment until one of the figures started to move forward. We freaked out and bolted away. But there was one more of these figures on the other side of our tent. We dashed through the 2 of the smaller ones. They tried to reveal that they were wielding jagged knives. This sight made my heart sink, and I pushed my leg as hard as I could. The next time we looked back, we finally lost them. My heart was racing. What kind of sick people would do that? Was it some kind of sick joke? I was glad that I escaped with my life, as I know that I am not the strongest runner. John looked at me with fear still in his eyes and asked, "What the hell just happened?" I couldn't reply as I was so exhausted from running. We spent the rest of the night hiding up in a tree until the sun rose. Then we immediately went back to the road and called to be picked up, leaving all our gear behind. We didn't report to the police as we thought they simply wouldn't believe us. Till this day, I still wonder what those people were actually doing out there. Was it simply animal sacrifices or worse? Until now, I haven't been able to share my story as I thought no one would believe me. I live in eastern Finland, in a small city. Most of the cities here are like openings or holes in a forest. If you looked at them down from the sky, in the Finnish folklore, there are many stories of forest creatures and spirits that guard the forest and lead people astray. There are even stories of forest shrouding a person so that he or she gets lost in it for years, that there is an upside-down world, and that where all kinds of wondrous and scary ancient things live. There are stories of a lot of people going into the forest shroud and making it out years later with odd stories to tell. There's this birch forest near my home. A black river streams through it, and it floods in the spring. I usually walk the dog in there because I think it's beautiful. Birch tree forests aren't that common over here, and the trees are old. Some of them are huge, old, and full of fungi and twisted. Sometimes I take the kids there too. My daughter is very sensitive in a way. From an early age, she's been seeing and talking to imaginary things, some of them which were odd. For example, my now dead grandmother. My daughter, she never met her, but often talked about her. One day, when we were eating out for dinner, she just stood up, looked out the window, and burst into tears and cried, "Goodbye, Mama." That was the end of the imaginary friend that we thought was my grandmother. It's curious because I think my daughter kind of reminds me of her too. One time, during the day when we were walking among the birch woods, my daughter said that was somebody there, a dead horse named Lotta. She told me that it was a very old horse and it lived there. I laughed to her. I'm just used to these kind of stories from her. I smile, shrug, and laugh at them, but there's always this weird undertone to them. Stories are fantastic and imaginative, but eerily consistent, like an unconscious hint of a memory. I think she's just a smart child with a good imagination. But when she cries at night, and I walk into the room, I find her sleepwalking and pointing at an empty chair in the middle of the room with her tiny index finger. It feels uncanny, like there's something between the lines. A couple of months ago, it was a full moon and I was walking my dog at night. I was going for a walk in the birch forest. The moon painted the frost bluish. As I approached the forest, the birch trees rose from the frozen ground like these white upside-down runs, and behind them, just black with hints of more white sides on the trees. It must have been like 100 meters away when I heard something from the dark forest. Something heavy was moving around there, crashing away in the forest. Sometimes, I've heard the rabbits scream in there when a lynx or a fox gets them. The rabbits scream like a small child when they are dying, but this was something different. A wild boar, maybe a moose. The dog was also interested in the sounds. Its ears pointed upwards. We walked closer to the white trees and the noises got louder. We both stopped to look. The dog didn't bark. It just pointed its nose towards the sound. We were like 20 meters away from the tree line when the sound stopped. For a while, it was just quiet. Then it started again. Something started running in the forest, near the tree line. Not from us, but toward us. It gives me chills just remembering this. Heavy, amazingly fast steps. I started to think it was a bipedal according to the sounds it made. 20 to 30 meters in, it made only a couple of sounds. In the pitch black and on uneven forest ground, somehow it was making up so much ground without tripping or anything, between the trunks and over fallen trees and bushes. It's not a human being, it's not a moose, I remember thinking. My dog's head accordingly turned to the movement. And then it stopped. Right before us, I felt the darkness staring at me and I stared back. For sure I wasn't going in the forest with my dog. But something dark was facing us. Just to the left of the path I was going to walk to enter the forest. It was making sounds in front of us. I started on my way back from the tree line, still facing the woods and the sounds. Whatever was in there, it was very interested in us, for I didn't seem to want to come out of the forest. I wasn't going to turn my back to it, that's for sure. My hands curled into fists. The dog had his tail between his legs as we backed away. The sounds continued. I could hear them even from over 100 meters away. It was then that I turned my back on it and started walking away. I walked fast, thinking all the possible forms of the darkness could have just been anything and maybe it was my imagination playing on me. The terror I felt was real. I rushed to my home and locked the door. Even my wife got nervous seeing me spook like that. I've been in the forest almost every night since then, walking the dog, and I've never seen anything or heard anything since. But I've always been on alert since that night, wondering if not knowing what that was might be hazardous. I've never seen or heard anything since that night. And I've never heard or seen anything move so fast through the woods before. But then I think about the dead horse my daughter said she saw. I know little children see things, but I also know their interpretations of things might be off. They see more than us adults who have learned to see the world around us in a certain way, but therefore lacking the ability to describe it. Maybe she didn't see a dead horse at all, but something that she couldn't describe in any other way. I have had an unusual experience with my husband. We have fished at a lake for the past 6 years. We live within a 2-hour drive from Yosemite, and this lake is surrounded with cattle pastures along one side with a dam, and the other side of the lake is all fishing and camping areas. This one day, instead of going on the public side of the lake, we hiked across the dam and set up our stuff on the pasture across the lake. This area is known for snakes, so we carefully checked the trees and rocks and grass, found it to be safe, and kicked back to enjoy our day of fishing. Now, people often hike to this area to fish, and the property owners don't mind much, so long as you pick up after yourself and don't start any fires. A high-risk fire area due to drought and dry grass. We were there for about an hour. No high winds, no boats in the water, yet. Middle of the week during school time, and about as quiet as a country lake can get. I noticed at first a high-pitched buzzing, like angry bees, but metallic sounding. My husband noticed it a few seconds later. It started getting louder, and we began looking for a swarm of bees or other flying pests. Nothing. There were no flies, bees, nothing was flying. Nothing. Just that buzzing noise. The noise kept getting louder and louder, but the few people on the other side of the lake weren't responding to it. It was loud enough that we had to shout to each other to be heard. The other people should have noticed it too and have been reacting to it. We kept looking around, even at the sky for a drone or a helicopter. But that day had clear cloud-free skies with no drone or helicopter activity either. The buzzing got louder, and we both put our hands over our ears at that point. I noticed a feeling of oppression, weight, fear. Basically my brain telling me to run like hell, but being so scared I couldn't move. My husband dropped to his knees, as did I, and I began crying. I just remember hearing the buzzing and like my mind couldn't think of anything but the noise. My husband later told me that he felt the same thing. So here we were, on our knees with our ears covered, crying. Then the noise just slogged off, like it moved away. When it stopped completely, we grabbed our stuff and ran. For the rest of the day, we both suffered from ringing ears, numbness in our faces and ears, and tingling in our hands and feet, like they were asleep. It took 24 hours for this to go away. Has anyone else experienced this phenomenon? Is this common? We haven't heard of another case of this out there. We even went back to the same spot several times, and it never happened again. To give some backstory to this, I am currently a 23-year-old male that has spent a substantial amount of time in the woods. I hunt, fish, prefer swimming in lakes to chlorine. Grew up in western Pennsylvania, playing capture the flag and release in the woods with the neighborhood kids. Before this story, I have never felt uncomfortable, nervous, or like I wasn't the top of the food chain. In the middle of 2015, I decided to take a girl I was seeing to Raccoon State Park in western Pennsylvania for a picnic. We parked at the camp office and headed down the main park road towards the trails away from the lake. We made our way up the trail road, and I decided to head right at the fork, up the gravel service road. We get up to a trailhead that I was familiar with, that I knew had a nice clearing with a few benches, just a short hike back into the woods, give or take a mile and a half. When we got to the park benches, we both mentioned it was kind of quiet. I shrugged it off and opened up my bag to start cooking. As the grill heated up, I was preparing the meat and veggies. She started getting nervous. She kept saying she did not like this part of the woods, she wasn't comfortable, etc. I didn't notice anything. I attributed this to the fact that she grew up in Miami and never really went into the woods. As the kebabs are on the grill, I start to hear movement in the woods. Assuming it was a rabbit or other small animal, I started making jokes about her being afraid of a bunny. As we are eating, I start to feel very uneasy. I told Kate that after we were done eating, we should head back down towards the lake. We begin to hear more rustling from farther down the trail. She gets very nervous and starts asking if we can go to the lake now. I decide to head down the trail a little ways to show her nothing is wrong. Still, assuming it was some small critter, I head down the trail about 100 yards, and it's obvious that this part of the trail had not been recently used. The further down the trail I go, the more I start to feel something is weird. The quiet mixed with a feeling of I am definitely not the top of the food chain freaked me out. I get back to the benches, and she tells me that she feels like she is being watched. She insists on heading back down to the car. She is unnerved to the point that the lake isn't an option. I agree and back up to begin heading down. On the way out, we are moving quickly. I still feel like I am prey, and she is insisting that something is watching us. As we get to the service road, whatever was making the noise in the foliage was not only staying with us, but was getting louder. I am convinced whatever was making those noises had to be large, bigger than a man. Neither of us ever saw what was in the woods. I am convinced whatever was in those woods was not any animal I have ever heard in the woods of Pennsylvania, and definitely was not human. I, to this day, believe I was being hunted by something and refuse to return to that portion of the park.